Wonderful. Thank you all so much for being here this evening, and thanks to those who are watching this later on YouTube. We're so grateful to have 4 of the 5 candidates for City Council President here with us this evening. We've got, in order of my screen, in no particular order other than who's on my screen, Doug Shipman, Courtney English, Mike Russell, and Natalie Archibong. We're so glad y'all could be here. And I'm Laura Smith. I'm with Arts Vote ATL. I'm a volunteer who's just helping organize a series of arts forums. We already held a mayoral forum. We're doing a forum for each of the districts and the at-large, and of course, City Council President. So without further ado, I'll hand it over to Betsy Holland after a quick introduction. Betsy is with Warner Media, has been for more years than I can count, working with government relations and corporate social responsibility. That's not her job title if you look it up on LinkedIn, but it's what she does. Also, Betsy is an elected official at the state level, so someone that can really, for those of you who haven't served in office, tell you what it's like. So that's the very high level. Betsy, if there's more you want to say about yourself, please do. But in my mind, you're a woman who needs no introduction. So take it away, Betsy Holland.
Same at you, Laura Smith. Thank you for that introduction. And if anyone's trying to do the math on my age, it is 24 and a half years so far at Warner Media, when she said forever and ever. Thank you so much to all of our City Council President candidates for joining us tonight. I have a huge passion for the arts, and so I'm so excited that we have this opportunity to hear from you on this particular issue of arts and culture in our city. I want to kick this off really by giving each of you an opportunity just to talk about your overall vision for the ways that City Council and City Council President in particular can have an impact on growing arts and culture in the city of Atlanta. And to kick us off, I'll start us with Courtney English. Courtney, go ahead.
Well, thanks so much, Representative Holland and the entire team. I appreciate the opportunity for this important conversation. When we think about the arts, there are a variety of things, candidly, that we need to take care of in the city, right? We need to have a clean and safe city. We need to ensure that we house the body. We need to ensure that we put food in the belly. We need to ensure that we educate the mind, but ultimately, we need to ensure that we feed the soul. And to me, that's what the arts community represents. But not only that, it's an economic driver for our region, generating about 20,000 jobs and anywhere between $50 million to $60 million in tax revenue. And so from a city council perspective, there are a number of reasons why we need to lean in our support of the arts. Number one, I think we need to have a highly functioning a single entity that operates within the city government so that folks know where they can go to get resources. So folks know how the issues that are facing artists are ultimately elevated. So folks know where they go to hear about the cultural events that are happening around our city. And that's an issue of funding, that's an issue of capacity, and it's an issue that quite candidly that we see lacking in a number of city departments. And so when we think about what needs to happen from a city council perspective, we've got to get really serious about putting the dollars, putting your money where your mouth is, and ensuring we have a high functioning Office of Cultural Affairs, and we're streamlining our processes so folks know that they have access to both information and resources to connect, that ultimately connect the dollars and opportunity.
Excellent, thank you. I'll turn it over to Mike Russell. Again, the question is just your general vision for how City Council and City Council President can impact the arts and culture in Atlanta.
Well, thank you again for having us today. I take a little bit different view on this, like I do most things. It starts with me as an individual supporting the arts myself. And since we've been in the city of Atlanta, we've done that quite often. We were slowed down a little bit by COVID, but I really like going to live performances. We had a great time over at the Trolley Barn, at SCAD, concert in the park. So I'm a real proponent of the arts, but I also love being a part of the arts and more about the performing arts. I come to Atlanta from a city in Germany that spent 10% of its budget on the arts, and it made a profound difference in the city. I don't know under the current crises if we have that money to spend right now, and I don't want to make false promises. But what I do think we should do for the arts is we need to look at them like businesses, like we do other small businesses in particular. And those people who were hurt, some even crushed by COVID, we need to make sure that they've gotten a fair shake with the relief funds that have come in, because these are businesses. These are how ways that people make their living, both in the arts and in the gig industry, those who are in the performing arts who haven't been able to do so for quite a while. So I think we need to take a real close look at that and treat them fairly like everybody else. And the last thing that I would advocate for, much like the parks, how do we make the arts self-sufficient so that they're not reliant upon government funding that may not be there all the time? How can we make it so that they can do things that make themselves independent of the government so that they can stand on their own 2 feet and be viable in this city? And I mean, that's a little bit different approach than I think most people would take, but I've seen that work in Europe where there's some government help, but they do it in such a way that they provide them the ability to be more self-sufficient, so that the funds are there, they can count on the funds. And it really is determined about how well they do their job that they can stay in business. And with that, I'll just say again that I'm happy to be here.
Excellent. Thank you, Mike, so much. I'll throw it to Nadalyn Archibong again. Just your vision of how City Council and City Council President can impact the arts and culture in Atlanta.
Well, thank you, and I hope you can hear me. I'm sorry, I'm in my car in between events, but this is very important, and I am proud and happy to be a part of this conversation. You know, the council has had a couple of runs at this. I've been on council for a number of terms, and so I've seen us almost get it right and then miss the opportunity. In 2019, we were able to put aside $1 million that was allocated through the Office of Cultural Affairs to help the creative community. That was a one-off. That was a utilization of trust fund dollars that were not spent, and so we redeployed them for the purposes of supporting the art community. We need a renewable source. We need a continuous source of funding so that there's not insecurity or uncertainty around the role that the city will play in supporting this very important community. Another thing that I've seen, and I would frankly, it's important for us to stop doing it, and that is duplication of task force and commissions and study groups. The mayor had something many years ago looking at developing a comprehensive plan for addressing the needs of the art community. Well, then the council had one looking at public murals, and then I had one where I wanted to look at something more comprehensive to have a ability of the council to understand the art community and how we could better support it. We don't need dueling studies and commissions. I would like for the council to look at laying out a roadmap for how we invest and engage in a better plan forward and not duplicate efforts and not have the engagement of that be in a sidebar, but more in a public forum where there's more engagement, and so we can learn from each other and develop a path forward. So that would be my hope and plan as council president, to lead the council into having that comprehensive approach to studying this important effort. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that. And then rounding us out, Doug Shipman, talking about your vision for how City Council and City Council President can impact arts and culture in Atlanta.
Thanks. It's great to be here. As many folks know, I have spent a large part of my professional career in arts and culture in Atlanta, being the founding CEO of the National Center for Civil and Human Rights, and then being the CEO of the Woodruff Arts Center, but also being a part of the board of Out of Hand Theater and other arts organizations. So to me, I think the City Council president and the City Council, first and foremost, has to advocate for the arts and the artist community. And I think that that does involve, we should have a dedicated source of funding. We don't do what most cities do, which is either take our rental car tax or our hotel motel tax and really significantly put it towards arts and culture. Most cities our size would put 10 to 15 million towards it. We put general fund dollars of 2 to 3 million at best towards it. But I also think that the best cities also find other ways in which artists and arts organizations can be included. If we have a community benefits agreement, it can include the artists or arts organizations. We have seen where you can require developers to have spaces, affordable spaces for artists or arts organizations. That's something that Midtown did actually at my recommendation. You can actually catalyze that through other means. There's a lot of marketing assets that the city has influence over, for instance, at the airport, and making sure that we're showcasing our artists and arts organizations at those places. And I also think we should think about the COVID relief dollars and potentially making bigger investments. An arts district in South Downtown had organically grown. It really has gone away. Potentially an arts district there as Newport redevelops could be supported by an infusion of capital. So I think we have to look at real innovative ways in which to change the trajectory of arts and culture. I think the arts and culture has actually gotten very good at supporting itself. It doesn't have very much government funding. I think we need to look at more ways to catalyze it to help it grow.
Excellent. Thank you for that. Our next question, Councilmember Archibong actually alluded to this, that cultural policy generally emanates from the Office of Cultural Affairs. And unlike several years ago, that is a department that reports directly to the mayor. But public art projects also run through the Department of City Planning and the Department of Transportation. And then you have separate policy that runs through the Office of Film and Television. So to prevent duplication and to make sure that things are harmonized, what are some ways that we can make sure that we're working together to promote arts and culture and that we're not working at odds within our own city government? And this time around, I'll throw it to Mr. Russell to begin.
I think this is one of the frustrations that many of us have with the way Atlanta has been mismanaged for such a long time. It's not just the arts, it's pulling a permit to do building. I'm suffering from that right now with the construction of my home that's a year behind schedule. So I think we need to take a real hard look at how we perform in this city government across the board, including the arts, because it's very cumbersome. It's slow. A lot of promises have been made that have never been kept. So I think that is something that we need to take a look at the processes, not just for the arts, but across the entire city, the way we do business. I think one of the fallacies is that people do not look at art as a business. And that's one of the things I like about SCAD, that they teach their artists that, you know, the bottom line, you have to sustain yourself in whatever you do. And I think that needs to be something that we do here in Atlanta, is to make sure that all of these things that are happening, that they're viable and sustainable and not just a shot in the dark. Again, I go back to being personally involved. Last evening, I had an event in an art gallery. A young lady has a private art gallery, and it was a way to help both her and I out, to draw attention to her artwork and also to a place for us to meet with supporters. And I think that goes back to the personal commitment to the arts in this city. But again, this is not just a problem for the arts. It's a problem across our city that right now, the way we're governed is very dysfunctional.
Thank you for that. Councilmember Archibong, you brought up this topic yourself. What are your thoughts on how we keep these departments from duplicating or working at odds with each other and instead working together to produce the best possible arts and culture environment?
You know, and thank you for the question. The Cultural Affairs Office at one point was in the Parks Department. And so with a lot of advocacy and conversation, the decision was made to put it under the mayor's office. And so there would be less bureaucracy and more direct engagement with artists and that kind of thing. And so that was an effort to make it less bureaucratic. The idea that we have a 1.5% requirement on major projects for that 1.5% to be deployed for the creative community, then that opens up multiple departments who may have a role in this. And so that's back to the idea of having this master plan. We must get that right. Once we have a master plan, this issue will be a part of that. We don't need to duplicate. We don't need things to be more bureaucratic than they need to be. And so it is going to be important to have that be a driving document. And we cannot wait. We need to hurry. The pandemic has wreaked havoc in that community. They've suffered, and we need to get that right. So it would be my recommendation that we prioritize that master plan, and incorporated in that would be how the departments either work together or we create another pathway for dealing with the creative community. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Shipman, same question. How do we get these departments to work together, make sure that they're not duplicating, but also make sure they're not working at odds with one another?
Sure. So I think we have to take a couple of pieces here. One is that film and TV and arts and culture are very, very different. And unfortunately, at the state, they often get lumped together, which really means film and TV gets everything, as you know, Representative Holland, and arts and culture kind of gets ignored. So I wouldn't really advocate for bringing into a single stop, because I think that they're very different. But I think the fundamental question we have to answer is, who is the advocate for the arts community and artists in Atlanta? In some cities, that's actually an Office of Cultural Affairs. You actually bring the advocacy role inside the city, and then that department actually coordinates not only within the city, but also with philanthropies and also with special initiatives to really be that one point of contact. You see that, for instance, in Charlotte when it was originally founded. So I think we have to answer that question. It could be through a strategic plan, or it could just be that question answered. You can do it inside the city, you can do it outside of the city. And then depending on where you put advocacy, then I think a single point of contact for both public art as well as Office of Cultural Affairs and funding, so fee for services, is very important. But I'd say there's one other piece of advocacy, whether or not this overall advocacy question is inside or outside. And that is, we need to make sure that when we contract with artists, we pay their bills quickly. We often struggle to just have payables go out. We often also ask the arts and artist community to do things for free. We love to put the arts community on our sizzle reel when we're pitching for the Super Bowl, but we really should treat it like any other industry in which we are paying market rates for their services, and that's built into budgets. And so I think there is also that piece of advocacy that needs to not only reside within an arts advocacy or an Office of Cultural Affairs, but really needs to permeate council and department heads, that artists are just like any other vendor to the city, and we need to treat them as such.
Great, thank you. Mr. English, if you'll finish us off here with the question of how we streamline these departments, or how we make sure our departments are working together, not duplicating each other, not working at odds.
Well, sure. I agree with much of what has already been said. We do need a single point of contact, a one-stop shop, maybe not necessarily combining multiple departments, but folks need to know who they can call to get their questions answered, to get access to both resources and information. That person should act as both an advocate, and I call it almost a Sherpa, to help guide you through the process of whatever it is you're trying to get done from an artist perspective in the city, whether you are an artist or a constituent and you're trying to connect to the arts community. And so we need one person, one number to at least call. And so, and then I agree with Councilmember Archibald. We do have to look at our arts and cultural strategic plan. Does need a refresh. It is outdated. It's been a while since it was initially drafted, and it's time to look at that plan to help guide us in the proper direction for how to structure our various departments so that we can better support the arts community. And then I think we need to do a deep dive on what the strategic plan will also allow us to do, is do a deep dive on the various ways we can help fund the arts. Many of those ideas have been mentioned here today. I agree that all of them warrant very serious consideration. And so, but we've got to get serious. This is actually an area where I don't know that we have, where I actually will say, as impatient as I typically am, I will say that we do need to refresh our strategic thinking around how we support the arts in the city from a city perspective. And so I will lean more so to say, hey, look, let's get the right folks in the room, the right combination of experts, and let's do a deep dive based on some good work that has already been done on how we can restructure the city in a way to better support the artistic community.
Excellent. Based on all four of those answers, whoever gets elected has a lot of work to do starting day one when it comes to the structure of these departments. So thank you for that. Each of you have alluded to this as well in some of your answers. And this is both an arts question, but also a little bit of an economic recovery question. Gig workers, independent artists, creatives, the employees, the people who are employed by the arts and culture industry in our town have been among those who were most affected by the COVID crisis that began in 2020. What sort of policies do you support that will help bring back economically the livelihoods of those folks and their families. They've been impacted in ways that mean it's harder to put food on the table. What can we do to make sure that those folks are going to have a pathway forward to success once the pandemic is, or as the pandemic, I suppose, is receding? I'll start with Councilmember Archibong on this one. Policies that can help support the economy of those who are working in arts and culture.
All right, thank you. I think as a budget priority, we need to set aside a percentage of our general fund budget to supplement the incomes of the creative community. I listened to the conversation that was had with the candidates for mayor, and it was very interesting to see what the mayor candidates thought about this same question. And the thing I heard over and over, and I agree with, is simplicity. We don't need to have a paper trail. We do need a paper trail because we do want to have accountability, but the complexities around applying for and receiving, we need to streamline it. It's the same knock that's been had on the support that we've given to those who are insecure around evictions. It was so cumbersome a process that it became a barrier. So same thing with homelessness. So when it comes to this community, I would recommend that the council set aside a percentage of the budget for this purpose, and that we come up with a process that is conducive to the community and will allow for more rapid disbursement of funds that are so direly needed. Thank you.
Excellent, thank you. Same question to you, Mr. Shipman. How are we going to support these employees of the arts community who've been impacted by the pandemic?
Yeah, it's been extraordinary. I mean, we're talking about unemployment rates of 60% at times within the arts community, and because artists, especially artists, often have a gig economy job, also as Uber driving and other kinds of things, and travel and hospitality were impacted. It was huge. So we've seen other cities actually take COVID relief dollars and have stipends for artists. So pick a number of artists and say, we're going to support you directly out of COVID relief as a recovery mechanism. I think that is something we absolutely can do. It's clearly legal. Other cities have done it. And I think we should consider. Because what happens if you don't support your artists during this recovery is that they will either leave or they potentially will leave arts, right? They will say, well, I'm going to have to get a regular job because, to your point, you can't put food on your table. So I think directly investing in them is one way we can do this. Two, I think more direct contracts for services for arts organizations, whether it's either into educational efforts or as an additional inclusion just in how we spend our dollars, I think is something we should consider. I think three, we have to realize there's a long tail of impact on the arts, because the recovery in arts may be slower than almost any other industry, because anytime you have an outbreak, your arts revenue is going to go way down. And so I think we also have to think about, in the longer term, investments in arts and arts organizations. They could be capital investments. Miami did a program where they had a sales tax specifically for fixing the roofs of arts organizations and the HVAC systems of arts organizations, which really lowered their costs, their capital costs, or whether it be a public-private partnership to actually bring more arts and more artists into other types of employment. I think we've got to think about this not only in the COVID relief and in the short term, but in the long tail.
Excellent. I'll bring it to Mr. English. How are we going to support these arts community workers as we start to recover from the pandemic?
Uh-oh, was on mute. Well, first and foremost, we have to wrap our arms around the housing challenges that we face. Over the past year and a half, I've had the fortunate opportunity to lead an eviction relief fund that, as of last week, has raised $11 million and served over 4,000 folks throughout the city and helped them avoid eviction. Many of those folks were artists. They were a part of the creative community. They were a part of the gig economy and part of a hospitality industry generally. And so we've got to, first and foremost, stabilize the eviction crisis. Atlanta is looking at anywhere between 20,000 to 30,000 evictions. If those are able to be processed and fully executed, that will create a permanent underclass for the city of Atlanta. And so we are really in a moment of crisis where we have to throw all of our resources, all of our energy at staving off the crisis, particularly as it relates to the artistic community, which was so devastated by the pandemic. Number two, I think we have to continue to invest in affordable housing generally. And that means we have to expand opportunities so that folks who make anywhere between $30,000 and $50,000 can live anywhere they want throughout this city. And so that means having a dedicated stream of revenue for affordable housing. It means ensuring that all of our city-owned land, the 800 plus acres of city-owned land, and combined with the land owned by the Atlanta Housing Authority, actually fully deployed to increase affordability. Number three, I think it means doing what we did at the Atlanta Public Schools, which was a look at converting vacant school buildings into affordable housing units. In fact, I'm very proud to say that through my work as chairman of the APS Affordable Housing Task Force, we actually created an artist village that is in the old Adair Park Elementary School that is adjacent to the West Side Trail of the Beltline. It's 35 units of affordable housing specifically and exclusively for artists. I also think I agree with what was said earlier around finding ways to fund the artistic community as we do development. I think those opportunities are huge and vast because they create sustainable streams of revenue that are aligned with the city, that are aligned with the growth that occurs with the city. And so there are a variety of things, approaches that we need to take. So.
Thank you, all of you. That's a great variety of ways of thinking about how we're going to support our workers and our employees in this community. So thank you for that. Mr. Shipman, this one's going to go to you first. We talk a lot about the lack of adequate funding for arts.
Did I get a chance to answer that question?
Oh, I'm so sorry, Mr. Russell. I have my order out of it. Thank you for correcting me. Thank you for jumping in. Mr. Russell, go ahead. The question goes to you.
I'll be brief. So again, goes back to my first answer. I think we somehow treat the arts like a second-class citizen, that they're not real businesses. And I think we need to change that attitude to say that the arts are a real business and they need to be treated with the same priority as any other business, large or small. And of course, the ones who suffer the most are the small ones who are in the gig economy. And our priority for funding should be just like any other business, because this is a livelihood for a lot of folks. The one thing I will not do is I'm not going to sit here and pander and say that I'm going to find a permanent funding stream for the arts specifically and separately when we have homeless people in the streets, our roads and bridges are falling apart, and crime is out of control, because honestly, I don't think that's realistic, and I don't want to promise more than I can keep. But I do think we need to treat everyone the same when it comes to business. This is being in the gig industry or in the arts, that's people's livelihood, and they should be treated the same as any other business and not as some kind of second-class citizen. We do need to streamline the process. Again, that's across the entire city. And I think when you address taxpayers in that manner, say these are businesses, this puts food on the table, a roof over people's heads, and we need to treat them with the same respect that we do other businesses, then it becomes more palatable when you talk about funding. But if you go to somebody and say, oh, we're just going to pay extra money or have dedicated money for somebody to paint or to sing, then you get a lot of resistance, a lot of pushback. So I would be in favor, again, of treating them equally to any other business. And then, like I've said before, in almost all of these forums, we need to find a way to make them self-sufficient, whether that's providing them a building or other things, so that they can be self-sustaining, so they don't have to rely on the taxpayer to stay in business.
Got it. Thank you for that response. And again, apologies for me going out of order for my sheet. Glad that you jumped in there. So this leads to an interesting question. We've talked, obviously everyone's addressing the idea of funding for the arts and whether it should be increased, whether it stays the same. Something that doesn't change in this instance is the fact that we have massive inequities in Atlanta when it comes to the arts. Inequities in how arts organizations are run, what neighborhoods have access to arts and culture opportunities, where the funds are being invested. So when we talk about arts and culture and lack of funding, we're not worried about Hamilton playing at the Fox Theater. We're worried about some of these smaller organizations and the people who live in communities who are able to access the arts. We talk about food deserts a lot, but we have arts and culture deserts in Atlanta as well. So where do we even start to address those kinds of inequities, and whose job is it to lead that change if we decide that that's a priority? And Mr. Shipman, I'll start with you this time.
Sure. So this is a very big issue, and it's got a couple of components. One is, in Atlanta, we've never been very good at supporting organizations in the middle. We have a lot of small organizations. We have a handful of large organizations. I obviously ran one at the Woodruff, which was the largest. And we don't really have a good middle. And especially of our organizations founded by Black leaders, BIPOC leaders, we really haven't supported their growth either. So one thing is, I think that we can be much more specific as a city and also as a community, public-private partnerships, to say, look, these, handful of organizations, especially focused on Black-led ones, we want to help them to scale, because it's very different stability when you're a $2 or $4 or $6 million organization when you're a $250,000 or $500,000 organization. So I think one is really being a catalyst at the city level, but not only city dollars in order to do that is a real key part of this. Two, like I mentioned before, a Miami program where you said, look, we're going to make capital investments could absolutely help with the capital needs in certain neighborhoods or of organizations that don't have as much from a capital perspective. But there's an idea that's long been in Chicago that I think is a very interesting one. So Chicago basically has an outdoor stage, and they pay for theaters to bring 1 week of production to that outdoor stage of a show that they've run generally. And the tickets are somewhere between free and $5. So if you look at our park system and you imagine that, and it doesn't have to be very fancy, you just need a place to store some of the equipment. If you imagine that we say, hey, we're going to ask that each arts organization mount their show for an additional, couple of weeks, one side on the west side, once on the west side park, once in Southwest, you actually could start to move around your arts into a lot of places that don't have it without the need of all of the capital investment, and bring the very best to neighborhoods. I think it's something that could be done here.
It's frankly not unlike what happened when the Alliance Theater was shut down and their performances had to go off in different venues around the city. It was a wonderful way to introduce people to new venues and introduce the arts to communities that maybe hadn't been experiencing them before. It's just what that reminds me of. So I'm going, Mr. English, if you could answer that same question, what are we going to do about these inequities in the way arts are delivered in Atlanta?
Absolutely. You mentioned the Alliance Theater. I enjoy watching the Christmas Carol in the parking lot in Summerhill. It was a great time, and that kind of elevates what part of what I think needs to happen, which falls into two different buckets. I think we have to do a better job of, one, bringing people to art. And particularly kids. Many of the equity gaps that we see in the city of Atlanta are actually exposure gaps. They're opportunity gaps, and I think the city can do a whole lot to partner with our school system, to partner with our nonprofits, to ensure that our kids actually have access to the overwhelming variety of artistic opportunities that this city presents. I had a group of students with me out knocking on doors a few weeks ago, and we were over near the Woodruff Art Center, and we actually walked by the High Museum, and one of the kids said to me, hey, look, that's the place from Black Panther. And I'm glad they made that connection, but it's more than the place for Black Panther, right? Like it is a place that has wonderful artists. And so we've got to close that gap by ensuring that all of our kids, all of the people in Atlanta, starting with our youth, have access to the artistic expressions or opportunities the city has to offer. The second thing, and I think Doug just talked about it a lot, is ensuring that we are bringing arts to people. And so we can elevate programs like Elevate in the city of Atlanta that actually will move around the city in and out of different neighborhoods to provide all forms of artistic expression. And those artistic expressions actually take place within our neighborhoods. And so we need to fund those opportunities. We need to grow those opportunities and ensure that they happen, particularly in underserved communities. I think that will go a long way to closing the equity gaps we see.
Thank you for that. I'll move on. Mr. Russell, your thoughts on how we address some of these inequities in our delivery of arts and culture in Atlanta?
So I used to do this, oops, lost my video. Sorry. I used to do this as part of my job in a financial institution, was to fund different organizations, arts, with the funding we had for charity. And one of the things I learned, and I relearned it recently in this campaign, is to listen, because one size doesn't fit all. So as I've moved around the city and asked different questions, we are a city of neighborhoods. Everybody wants something a little bit different. So I think this is not a top-down thing. This is a bottom-up. what do the folks in that particular part of the city want to see and do, participate in, and then we help them do that. And so I just had a very interesting conversation with the grandmother about the Peace Park. The Peace Park's fabulous, but no one asked them in their community how they wanted to utilize that park. And she's very upset about that. So I told her, she's a member of the community organization, said, well, if I'm your city council president, I listen. And I would come to your organization, ask you, what do you want to do in this park? Do you want to have concerts? Do you want to have dances? Do you want to have a fashion show? We all have our idea of what the arts are, but sometimes, that differs from other folks in different communities. We need to listen to them, and then we need to facilitate them being able to have what they want to have in their community and to utilize these things the way they see fit. I had the same conversation with the conservatory over in Grant Park about the facilities over there that they asked the city to use in a certain manner. There's a building over there, and they were told no. Why? And my question was, why? Well, that's the way we've always done it. We use that building for this and not for that. And I thought that doesn't make sense. Why don't we facilitate what the people in Grant Park want to use? Because after all, that park and those facilities are basically there for them. And so I think we need to maybe pump our brakes a little bit and go back to the communities and ask them, hey, what would you like to see? Hey, parents, what would you like to expose your children to, rather than us trying to dictate down? Because I tell you, I've learned there's so many varieties of what people consider and want to have when it comes to recreation, and a great part of that is the arts. So as city council president, I would listen to those folks. I'm a big fan of community organizations and the NPUs, and to actually ask them, piggyback on almost every community I've been in, they have annual fest or block parties, whatever. Why could we not piggyback on that in Inman Park and Virginia Highlands, here where I'm currently living in Morningside, Piedmont Heights? Why not piggyback on those things and work with the communities rather than developing a plan for them? Let us work with them on their own plan.
Excellent. Thank you for that. Councilmember Archibong, your thoughts on how we address these inequities and how we're delivering arts and culture and how we're funding arts in Atlanta.
And another part of the question was, and who is responsible for making this happen, which is really the sweet spot. I'm so excited to listen to the questions and to have the art community listen to our responses, because these are opportunities for us to learn. I don't profess to be a subject matter expert, but what I am is a great listener, and I am able to work with people to implement their vision. And so when you think about people like Heather Infantry, who had the courage to say equity for the arts, who wanted reparations, I should say, in the art space. I don't want to be paternalistic and tell the art community how this equity conversation needs to flow and what we need to do in response to it. So I think the responsibility is a partnership. I think the city needs to be open to the conversation. And then we need to invite to the table those partners who can inform us and help us understand the journey and can understand possibilities. And then we can start working toward getting that accomplished. I was reading somewhere and someone in the art community said, we're so busy surviving, we don't have time to thrive. And so I want the city to be that partner, and I want the city council to be at the table, listening to that partnership opportunity, and then executing to the extent that the city, one, can be an investment partner. We can also motivate others to help with that. We need to lobby the state. The failed effort to have 1/10 of a penny, similar to what's going on in Denver. We need to come back and lobby for that again, because it would be great for not only Atlanta, but if it was a statewide issue, it would help our whole state. So those are just some ideas that I have. Thank you.
I acknowledge that the state has an abysmal track record when it comes to funding arts throughout the state of Georgia. And when we talk about inequities and access to the arts, this is a state rife with inequality with how we fund and how people can access the arts. So thank you for reminding me of that before we go back into legislative session. So our next question is a little bit more of a pie in the sky. Don't think so much about funding and structure. I'm just curious how you would get creative. We have a lot of departments in the city of Atlanta or entities in the city of Atlanta that could probably benefit from partnering with the incredibly strong arts community we have in Atlanta, whether that's Atlanta Public Schools, it's Parks and Recreation, it's economic development and tourism. Really, any part of Atlanta could potentially benefit from partnering with this thriving arts community. If you had your way, what is one way you would turn to the arts community to see how it could elevate another part of Atlanta, how there could maybe be a mutually beneficial opportunity for groups to work together? And I know that's a big imagination question. Mr. English, I'm going to throw it to you first, if you don't mind. How can we use the arts to also help us achieve some of our other goals somewhere in the city?
Ooh, wow. A few things come to mind. I talked a little bit about this earlier. I mean, there are the cultural and moral, if you will, benefits that come along with the arts. I think Atlanta for far too long has been a tale of two cities. We have been incredibly divided around issues of race and class, even though that we purport to be something different. The art community can give voice, candidly, and has always given voice to those differences, and how we bring those differences together. It has always been, the artistic community has always been provocative. It's always been pushing the envelope, you will, and daring us to be the better, best version of ourselves. And so one thing that comes to mind is when we think about the economic gaps in this city, right? We talk about it from a theoretical standpoint sometimes, a people standpoint, a statistical standpoint all the time. But one of the things that, again, that we need to bring more voice, more life to is the soul part of it, right? And I think the arts community, as it thinks about all of the issues that they are always advocating for, can lend itself to helping bridge the divide that we have constantly seen between race and class in this city. And I think there's an incredible opportunity there to help bring Atlanta together in a way in which we quite frankly haven't seen before.
Thank you so much for that. Mr. Russell, same question to you. Let your imagination run wild. How can the arts community help us address or elevate other areas of the city if we put our minds to it?
Did we lose my audio? Hello?
We've got you. I can hear you.
Okay. So while I am very untalented when it comes to the arts, I tried to play trumpet in high school. I made it to second chair. To be honest with you, I'm in awe of people who are in the arts. My husband's best friend is an artist, performing artist in Amsterdam. She's performed before the King, and I just sit there in awe. And what I would like to do is what happened to me as a young kid from a family that didn't have a lot of money, is to expose people to different things. I had a teacher who took me to a concert. I had a teacher who took me to see Carmen. That changed my life. I had never experienced anything like that. Had to wear my dad's tie because I didn't have a suit and all of that. And just to expose people to different things. I love going to small theaters. I think a lot of people overlook those small theaters. I love going to the Trolley Barn and maybe supplementing those who can't afford to do those things. But what I've found, and this is from my own personal experience, is we don't see ourselves as that's something for us. That's for other people. And whatever that art is, whether it's performing arts or it's anything else in the arts, is to bring that to people who don't see that as something that is for them. Music is for everybody. There's different kinds of music. Artwork, whether it's modern or traditional or impressionist or whatever, is to expose people. So if I had an endless budget, I would expose all those things to as many people as I could. I've lived in cities where they, rather than taking down graffiti, they paid the artist to do that, and they painted murals to express themselves. And wow, there was no graffiti painted over it because they respected each other as artists. So that was one way of doing it for people who could learn how and express themselves that way. I also think it channels energy from kids who don't have anything else to do. The arts are a great way to do that. So if I had an endless budget, I would start with the kids to expose them to things that they might not think are for them, and all across the arts, and to leverage the things that we have in the city. I'm a huge fan of SCAD. I've actually struck up a friendship with one of their students. He gave us a tour, and I've just stayed in contact with him because he was so impressive. And so I would want to, if I had an endless budget, I'd want to expose people to as many different things in the arts in all of its forms and variety, so they find something that they see themselves in, which for me is generally concert music and small venues that are more intimate. And for other people, of course, it'll be something else. But I think the fact that I, as a poor kid, had the opportunity to be exposed to those things changed my view of myself, and then my view of the arts. Yeah, hey, this is for me also.
Thank you. Going to see Carmen as a young kid. What a great way to experience the arts and experience opera. Councilwoman or Councilmember Archibong, I'll take it to you next. You're not worried about budget, pie in the sky. What can we be doing to utilize the arts community to elevate other parts of the city of Atlanta?
Can you go to the next person? I'm kind of tied up for 1 second. I apologize.
Absolutely, I understand. We're all multitasking in this world. I'll throw it to Mr. Shipman. Again, you're not worried about budget. What are you going to do to help the arts elevate and work cohesively with other parts of Atlanta?
Sure. So it reminds me of a quote that Susan Booth, who's the artistic director at the Alliance, likes to say, which is that artists are great problem solvers, and not only for arts problems. And so I think that you start to think about, well, where could you potentially have that influence? So one, I think, is in transportation and in design of everything from crosswalks to signage. I mean, we saw the absolute improvement of our rezoning signage when we brought in designers to do that a few years ago. So I actually would bring in, without any constraints, a whole host of different types of artists into the transportation department, and to think about how to actually bring in design into those projects, not just arts design, but actually artistic framing of how you think about transportation. And then the other one, which just this week in the New York Times, there was an incredible article about a study that showed that greening neighborhoods actually led to a vast decrease in crime. And the hypothesis is that if you walk out of your door and you're surrounded by green space and you're surrounded by aesthetic beauty, actually your stress level goes down, and actually you are just a much happier person, and thus the community is also happier, and it kind of changes the way that community works. So I actually would then say, artists within our public safety conversations, how do we think about creating beautiful spaces that aren't just parks, but integrated throughout the entire city, and in ways that really do look at places that have a high propensity for crime? And how do we actually meld those two things together? I'm not sure we even know exactly what the outcome would look like, but I think putting those, given that study just recently, I think putting those together could lead to just transformative kinds of breakthroughs. And I think that it also would have a great influence just on the way that we think about how we build communities overall.
It's great, some fascinating ideas in there. I'm going to check in on Councilmember Archibong, see if she's able to answer this last question, although I'll understand if she's tied up. I know we all have a lot of things we're juggling.
No, I finally got untied up. I'm
Wonderful. You get to have the last statement on this question. How are we going to elevate the arts to help us also solve other problems or do other things in the city of Atlanta?
You know, it's an important question, and I had the opportunity to introduce I think Erica Shields was the police chief at the time, and we were talking about, it was before George Floyd, so it's in the public safety space, to utilize artists and police officers to have there be a mentoring relationship. The artist would teach the class and the police officer would have to then be the student, and it would be with a diverse set of instructors to sort of break down the barriers that may exist between someone with a uniform and a gun and someone from another community. I was replicated out something in New York along those same lines, have been very, very successful. There's $50,000 right now sitting in a trust account for the implementation of this. And so I'm excited about that possibility. And that's just one example how something as so innocuous, right? Everybody likes colors. Everybody, likes to express themselves. And so taking this in the public safety space can be transformative for our officers. And so I'm looking forward to the implementation of that. And that just speaks to possibilities around other departments as well. So that's just one example. I'm excited to explore other possibilities.
Well, that was a fantastic exercise for us to essentially wrap up on. I loved hearing all of those different approaches to how we can use arts to make that kind of impact. I was taking some notes as we spoke, and something that really illustrates for us the way that arts touch every part of our community. In your answers, you also were talking about sustainability, public safety, economic development, transportation, housing, education, transit, zoning. All of this is also connected to our arts and culture. So I think it's wonderful we had this opportunity to talk about arts and culture front and center as a political issue, and not as though it is an afterthought or a footnote in the way that we run our city government. So thank you so much for being part of this really productive and interesting conversation. You've left me with a lot of things to think about how partnerships can work with the arts and how we can improve them for the city of Atlanta. So thank you to all four of you. And Laura, I'll throw it back to you to close.
Wonderful. I just want to thank once again all of the candidates for being here. I know you are very busy people, and some of you have places to be right after this. So thank you, Doug. Thank you, Mike. Thank you, Courtney. Thank you, Nadeline. And thank you, Betsy, for such thoughtful questions for our candidates. And for fighting the good fight for us at the state capitol. Everyone have a wonderful evening, and thank you again for your time and energy.
Thank you.
And one
Thank
more
you.
thing, I look forward to working with all of you in some capacity on the arts, and with one of you in particular as our next city council president. But I expect all of you to, in your various capacities, continue being a part of these conversations, because anyone who runs for city council president is going to make big changes in the city of Atlanta. So thank you for your civic service as well.
Thank you, Laura.
Thanks, Laura.
Thank you both.
Bye.
Bye-bye.